Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Please find your seats. Pull out your 5-star notebooks. You think kids in school still use that kind of stuff? Or you think it's all laptops?
Ooh, I want to say, well, depends where you're at. If you're rural, probably more so spiral notebook.
Yeah.
The way me and Adam do notes for the week is because we actually record this out of Adam's place, he has whiteboards that he puts everything on that I'm able to reference as well. All my stuff goes old school into oh my God, is this a 5-star? It's not Staples brand. God damn it. But my stuff just goes into a spiral notebook that I take notes in. So,
Yeah, very rudimentary show. But I got to feel like this is what an actual professor used to feel like back in the day when he was teaching. These were his things that he used, and we're certainly not professors, but boy, do we like to get high and talk about history. And
wouldn't it be nice to have an overhead projector?
yeah, the old school one with the clear film that you could write stuff on. And every once in a while when the teacher was out of the room, you'd put some tits on it in hopes that they wouldn't catch it, and they'd flash it up on the screen. Yeah.
For the next class or whatever it was.
Good time.
Yeah.
Definitely a good time. We're going mining today. As you could tell by the title in the episode, Chris and I are on the California Trail. We are headed to go strike it rich in California.
There is gold in them thar hills.
We kind of struck gold with this episode because the gold rush...
I don't like that. I don't like that this early on. Like, we're 2 minutes in, we're making gold. I was actually thinking of several gold puns, and I'm actually just upset you beat me to it.
We're podcasting just golden nuggets because out of this episode, we're going to start by talking a little bit about the Mexican-American War. It'll be its own episode.
Manifest Destiny.
Yep.
I always think about, it was either Shanghai Noon or Shanghai Nights, where he's trying to explain to John Wen.
Chung Wang? Yeah,
Chung Wang.
It's got to be Shanghai Noon because that was the Western.
Yeah, and it was Owen Wilson. He's like, it's Manifest Destiny. You can't stop it. Oh, no, that was in Night at the Museum when he also played a tiny cowboy.
Yes. We're going to mention Donner Party. That's going to be its own episode. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the San Francisco Mint, which minting the whole idea behind Fort Knox and everything for the U.S. currency holdings and gold holdings and shit. That's fascinating for its own episode. We are going to mention stuff about the Transcontinental Railroad, which will obviously be its own episode. So we just found so many different directions to go off of this gold rush. And I knew that the gold rush was a big deal, very aware of what the 49ers were, had absolutely really never put the idea together that this was pre-Civil War.
Not only that, but you kind of wonder how people migrated west and how you would assume that, like, if you were just thinking about like the spread of something, it just like slowly crept across like the continent and everything. It just moved from the Mississippi River and it just kept going. This basically was a section that was probably up to the Mississippi, maybe a little bit over on the other side of it, but then just kind of territory between there. And then all of a sudden you get this growth over on the West Coast. And then everything has to it's so big and it's so massive that everything has to kind of then meet it.
Yeah. Yeah. It was we got the land, there was a migration of people, and then we had to chase that out there with a railroad, basically, so we could utilize that new area as much as possible. And everything in between was still kind of up for grabs. Like California becomes the 31st state. Now, obviously, it's the westernmost state minus Hawaii and Alaska, and maybe Seattle if it sticks out further. But it's literally the West Coast becomes the 31st state, and then we kind of backlog in from there with the rest of them. But it was because it was so important to gain statehood out there that it had to happen first.
Well, and because so many people flocked out there, that's essentially what fast-tracked the statehood. They're like, oh, shit. We got all these people heading out, and there's not really any set of governance. It's literally the Wild West.
Yeah, and we also wanted all of this gold in our government.
Heck, there you go. All right, guys. Well, without making you wait any further, remember, listen to us wherever, or sorry, not listen to us. You're obviously listening to us, but rate us wherever you guys are listening. 5 stars or whatever the highest rating would be on your preferred podcast platform. And without further ado, let's get Golden Pony Boy. fucking stay Golden Pony Boy. Isn't
Yeah,
it?
that one was tough.
God damn it. I have to do like this. Stay Gold Pony Boy.
That's okay. As long as you can keep tossing the references.
So.
Oh, shit.
What?
Are we recording?
Yeah.
Oh. Whoops.
There you go. See, now who's out of it? Okay, so the state of the country, the state of the United States at this point is in 1849, and we're going to go back a little bit, but when it really kicks off is going to be 1849. The western border of the United States is formed like by Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, and then Texas has been brought in at that point, and Texas is like really weirdly shaped. I think it includes maybe a little bit of like New Mexico, and then also this weird strip like of Oklahoma, and then kind of up a little bit more north. It's really, you can see how they carve states out of it.
Yeah, well, the whole idea was for statehood, they kind of wanted like uniform sizes and parts of landmass. And then you could tell as we just gained so much more territory, and they're like, shit, we're going to end up with like 90 states if we keep making them this size. But if in the West, everything is bigger, but it's all bigger in comparison to similar to everything else, maybe we're going to be okay. And Texas, I want to say, is only like 4 years or 5 years older than California.
Yeah.
And when it got brought in, it was its own country. Like, it was its own sovereign nation.
Republic of Texas. Wasn't it? Yeah.
And so that was kind of like, well, if we're taking the Republic and bringing them in, we have to kind of have all the land that they had. Yeah. So this is a big, like, oh shit, that's a lot. Are we going to carve it up into a bunch of little states, or do we just call it Texas?
Will, that wasn't part of the deal. You also have the Minnesota Territory, which again, it's not the state of Minnesota. It's that area that's basically there up north with the Dakotas and everything. Might have also been maybe into Montana. I'm not sure. And then you had what they considered Indian Territory, which was kind of the Pacific Northwest and some of the Great Plains area. The Oregon Territory, the Oregon Territory was the Pacific Northwest. Great Plains, that kind of area, was what they considered Indian Territory. And then the area which was considered the Mexican Secession, correct? Unorganized territory that was basically California, Nevada, Arizona.
Parts of the other parts of New Mexico.
Yeah.
And that was all former Spanish holdings that the Mexican War for Independence liberated from Spain, which I'm sure Spain was probably licking its wounds right around this time, because they had suffered quite a bit after losing part in the Louisiana Purchase and everything like that. Their holdings were kind of being pulled back a little bit. I'm sure that was partially, and we'll figure it out during that episode, in the Mexican-American War. But it left Mexico with a lot of land to control, and it was considered what they would call Alta and Baja California. Baja, the southern part, Alta, I'm sure Alto means high, basically, in Spanish, so it was the higher part of California. And they didn't really populate the Alta area as much because it was just so far away from everything else. Yeah. Like it basically wasn't really connected to the rest of their land holdings. So, and we'll kind of talk about how they seem to have been pretty cool with just like migrants coming and becoming Mexican citizens, as long as they promised to basically farmstead. Yeah. Or homestead, almost.
You guys get the land ready, nice and usable. That way when people start moving over here from the east, they have a nice area to kick you out of.
Yeah, pretty much. So Mexico would win its independence from Spain in 1821. This would begin Mexican rule in California. It took control of what we were just talking about, the Alta and Baja regions of California. The 1824 Constitution of Mexico referred to Alta as a territory instead of a part of the states. So just like we had these territories that you were just talking about, this was sort of like their territory, kind of their to-be-developed area. And since it sort of was a territory, you would see American traders and trappers kind of starting to have this smaller presence in Northern California. That happened around the 1830s, that the first settlers would kind of start to arrive.
There were quite a few people up in the Oregon Territory as well.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that was also kind of where they had that interaction. Is it wasn't just like people coming over from the eastern portion or the then western portion of the United States, but they probably had a lot of that interaction with whoever, which could have also been settlers. When we do the Oregon Trail, I'm not sure what the dates are on the Oregon Trail.
Didn't we do the Oregon Trail?
No, we haven't done the Oregon
Oh,
Trail.
we did the
Lewis and
exploration.
Clark. We did, yeah, Lewis and Clark.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I think it might have been before this because there was established routes there and everything. So it probably was before the gold rush. So you had settlers that were essentially people that had lived in the United States, probably also a lot of people that had immigrated and then just kind of went to go, like you said, homesteading or seek their fortunes somewhere else where they could claim land.
Well, that was just the Mexican citizens that were doing that.
Yeah.
And you had, I want to say, what, Lewis and Clark was 1806?
I'm going to be looking stuff up.
Okay.
Here.
1806, somewhere around there. So if they're kind of making inroads into California in the 1830s, that means that within 24 years, there was already enough people that had been out in the Oregon Territory.
Yeah, 1804 to 1806 was the Lewis and Clark expedition.
So yeah, 24 years, these people have already moved into this Oregon Territory enough. They're trappers and traders, so they've just established these routes along the way. 1844, they would start bringing wagons over the Sierra Nevada mountains, and the Sierra Nevada mountains are a tricky mistress to try to cross. You always hear about the Rocky Mountains because it's the biggest chain in the country, and they are massive, very impressive mountains. Sierra Nevada mountains are nothing to scoff at. They're pretty impressive mountains themselves. Mm-hmm. And nobody knows that better than the 1846 Donner Party.
Yeah.
Because as we talked about, that we'll be doing their own episode, these were a group of travelers that ended up getting stranded in the Sierra Nevadas at the wrong time of year. I want to say it might have been like January.
Let's just say winter.
Winter, yes. Yeah. And they would end up snacking on each other to make it through. So we have these incursions already. 1844 is kind of when the settlers come. May 13th, 1846, the U.S. will declare war on Mexico to start the Mexican-American War. Crazy that they declared war and it took 2 months for it to reach California itself.
So I know this is kind of off topic. Oregon Trail laid by fur traders, 1811 to 1840 was when it was initially passable by on foot and horseback.
Very interesting that they were out there that fast just hoping to make money off of the area. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we have the Mexican-American War that kicks off in 1846, and during this Mexican-American War, we come upon this little place called Sutter's Mill, and on January 24th, 1848...
Oh, hold on.
Oh, we got more?
Well, something a little bit before that.
Okay.
So, gold had actually been discovered in California, they have record of it dating back to March, I think, 1842. And it was in the mountains north of where Los Angeles is now. Basically,
so a little more southern.
Yes. The people that found it, though, as we'll see what was intended with the actual California gold rush, the cat just got out of the bag. This person kind of had the wherewithal to be like, hey, and they were small finds. I don't think they hit huge veins, but kind of like those initial finds that caused the, gold rush. It starts out with just some flakes.
Yeah.
And just some small pieces. So basically, the friars of that area just went around telling everybody, hey, shut the fuck up about this, because what's going to end up happening is, again, this is down in that area that's probably more based where you have more of a Mexican population.
Yep.
So they're like, there's already fucking white people in the attic. If they find out that there's gold here, they're all coming over here. So we need to not we need to keep quiet about this. But then Cat does get out of the bag, and that begins with...
Oh, yeah. January 24th, 1848, a man named James W. Marshall, who was working at Sutter's Mill on the American River. He's kind of, I want to say he was working on the water wheel and where the exit is.
So he's, I guess, the manager building this sawmill for this other guy. The other guy, I think, was John. Okay, yes. John Sutter was the guy that was actually funding the sawmill. That was his business. Marshall was the supervisor overseeing it. And I think while they were working on it, he was walking along one of the sluice gates, the thing that brings the water in that can then turn the water wheel and power the saws and all of that. And he saw something glint down in the bottom of it. And because essentially gold is heavier, it'll settle to the bottom where the dirt and everything gets washed away. He came down and he was holding it up to the light and everything, and one of the workers even kind of saw it and looked at it, and he's like, "Oh shit, like that's gold." So what's he gonna go ahead and do? He's got to go tell his boss, right?
Yeah. There's also, I'm definitely shooting from the hip on this. I think it's called iron pyrite. Is that what fool's gold is?
I believe so, actually.
Uh, Iron pyrite is just a naturally occurring mineral. And again, this is going off of a science lesson that I haven't had in decades. But it is an organic material. I believe metals are inorganic materials.
Well, technically, everything has to be organic because it's created, right?
I I don't know, man.
Anyway,
So yeah, he ends up taking it to John Sutter. John Sutter, very interesting man. Started off life as Johann Sutter. He was a Swiss immigrant that went ahead and booked it out of Europe, facing mounting debts that he was trying to run away from instead of pay off. Ends up in Mexico, becomes
once he racks up the debts in the United States, he just goes to Mexico, and then it becomes Juan Sutter.
That's yeah, because that's what it was. He was Johann Sutter. He makes it over to Mexico, becomes a Mexican citizen. I'm sure he's Juan Sutter at that point. He gets a fairly large swath of land that he kind of claimed under this sort of Homesteader Act, and he ends up building Sutter's Fort on there. Now, Sutter's Fort would then go on to become Sacramento eventually, but that's in the future. Sutter's Fort would be kind of the jumping off point to where he would create Sutter's Mill, using the American River to turn the paddle wheel to be able to start sawing lumber or anything like that.
This was near what, Coloma?
I think so. Yeah. So the whole idea that he had was like, all right, I'm going to start making wood products and start doing a few other things around here. So that way, when the people start showing up, I have supply to go ahead and fill them out. I'll make a shitload of money.
Not only that, but like I'm maybe one of the only games in town right now from a lumber perspective, which means I can take all of this area around me and gather it for resources. Whereas if something were to happen per se that would draw a ton of people over here, all of this area, especially because guess what? The first place these people are going to go is going to be exactly where my guys found this gold, because that's where they know it's at. So any of my plans for this mill are going to be completely thrown to the fucking wind because of the influx of people destroying the river. I'm not going to be able to use it to run this mill. He's basically in a position where he's like, I've got plans for this. I've got huge like agricultural plans as well. And I'm going to be the game in town here. And this is what's going to make me money. I'm not interested in gold. It's great that you found it. Maybe we'll send some people and keep it quiet out to the river and see if we can find some more. Well, but that's not my priority right now. So he tells Marshall, he's like, let's just go ahead and be quiet about it.
The whole way that they figured this out is so fascinating to me. And this is where I got off on the whole organic and inorganic thing.
Was that how they tested the gold?
Yeah. So metal, as opposed to any kind of a mineral or a rock, if you pound on it, it's malleable. So it's going to flatten out. It's not going to crack. It's not going to shatter or anything like that. He did the pound test on these nuggets that he found, and they smushed. Huh?
He took them to Pound Town.
He took them to Pound Town. They flattened out. The next move that they made was they used lye, which I believe, again, bad at science here. It's a caustic chemical.
Correct. I think it'll erode stone, right?
Yeah, it eats away at what I would say would be organic matter, because you can also
natural mineral, like a more of a natural rock.
You can sprinkle lye on a body and it'll make it disappear too.
Yeah.
So thanks Casino and Breaking Bad and every other movie where a mobster sprinkles lye on a dead body.
Me, Myself, and Irene.
Yeah, yep, that too actually. Lawn darts, lye. So they put it in this lye broth. And lye is also used to make soap. It's a cleaning agent for clothing as well.
I know it's all based upon what's added and the amounts and everything like that, but the fact that you just described the product that dissolves bodies and eats like rock and shit like that, they're like also a soap. You scrubbed yourself with it.
I mean, it'll take off the layer of skin that's dirty.
That's true.
You just better hope you got a new one ready to go. So they toss this gold in the lye, and if it's fool's gold, if it's iron pyrite, it's just going to dissolve completely. If it is gold, it's going to come out shinier and better because all of the impurities will have been burned off by the lye. Well, they end up fishing these gold nuggets out of the lie, and Sutter's like, shit. If everybody else finds out about this, we are going to lose all of our mill workers because all they're going to do is go out and start hunting for gold. I can't afford to lose kind of my nest egg, so you and I need to keep this a secret. And I'm sure Marshall's like, okay, well, can I just keep what I found? And he's like, yeah. And he's probably looking at it like, okay, that's a pretty good payoff for this NDA.
And I think he kind of had the foresight. He's like, I probably can't keep this private for long because what's already happened. If you're breaking this down, if you believe the information that one of the mill workers saw him, holding up gold and everything like that, that guy knows. He's told the other mill workers. They're probably already going over there and looking for it, which means that information is going to keep getting out. However, that's probably kind of a slow burn. This guy also knows that it's only a matter of time before that big pop happens. So he's like, okay, listen, I'm going to send this guy, Charles Bennett, have him meet with this guy, Colonel Mason, who was essentially the highest ranking?
The chief U.S. official.
The chief U.S. official in that area. And so at that point, he would, because it's not a territory under the United States or anything like that at this point, or was it? No, not at this point.
Not yet.
Essentially, the highest ranking official, like a military colonel, would be the one that you would go to in matters of, hey, can we go ahead and get the rights to this land? And he's like, why do you need the rights to the land? He's like, no reason. I'm building a lumber mill, and just in case anything were to happen, I need to make sure that I have these land rights to keep people off of it.
Well, the interesting part about that is he doesn't ask for the land rights because technically this is still Mexican territory and he has the land. He asks for the mineral rights.
Oh, that's right.
The mineral rights is anything below the soil, so anything below the land.
That's so fucking stupid.
Yeah, well, I mean, you get mineral and oil rights all the time from people that have land that have prospectors looking for.
I know, but the
oil or
concept
everything.
of just being like, it's not the ground you're standing on; it's like 6 inches down.
Yeah, you're not entitled to anything below that you find. That's all us.
Mm-hmm.
So he ends up sending this guy who is a goddamn chatty Cathy, if I'm being honest. In February 1848, his name was Charles Bennett. He sends him to go talk to Colonel Mason. Well, along the way, he stops off. He's headed to Monterey. The reason he was headed to Monterey is because that was the official capital of Mexico, or California, under Mexican rule.
And again, this isn't at a time where it's like, hey, jump in the car and get down to Monterey as quickly as possible. It's like, hey, get on the horse, and you're going to have to stop 4 or 5 times on the way down to Monterey and these little other towns till water the horse and do all that kind of stuff. But don't fucking talk to anybody about this insane secret that you have that's probably like the most exciting thing that you've ever dealt with in your life.
He ends up having to outdo another guy because he stops off at this little town named Benicia. And as he's in the bar, he overhears these 2 locals talking about a coal vein that was found like 40 miles south of where they were. And excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I found a coal vein too. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say coal? I meant gold.
Yeah. Like he wanted to get it out. So this is the first time that he spills the secret that he swore he wouldn't. Stopping off in San Francisco on the way to Monterey, he then again probably felt like it was easier to say another time.
I feel like this is a Paul Revere situation.
He's
just riding down by the wharf being like, gold, gold.
And we actually have a dickhead in this episode that does that. So he does eventually end up making it to Monterey. I don't know how many people however many people heard this. I don't know how many more people he told on the way. I'm sure it might have been like every time he passed somebody on the road, he's like, hey, what's going on? How you guys doing? Safe travels. Just going to talk to Colonel Mason. I found gold.
I don't even think it was just like that. It's just like, I found gold.
He gets to Colonel Mason, and Colonel Mason, knowing that he can't really make a ruling on something that's not official U.S. territory, it's like, no, man, I can't do that. What makes you think that I can give you the mineral rights to land that I don't even think the U.S. holds at this point?
And again, this is January. And I know we talked about the Mexican-American War, that ending, or I don't know if we said the end date. That also ends in 848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
Yeah, May 30th. So we're talking about just a very, very fast amount of time afterwards. And this is when the treaty is signed. The actual, shit.
Like a resolution or like
Yeah.
cease of hostilities.
Like they declared the end of hostilities.
The end of hostilities, I think, went all the way till January of 1847 when the Treaty of Cahuenga was signed, and that resolved the fighting in Northern California, where
I think
all
it
of
was
this seemed to take place.
1848, wasn't it? Because it was like 9 or 10 days after they found gold.
That is January 1847.
Okay. Well, either way.
It's signed in
immaterial.
very quick succession.
Yeah, but the treaty that was signed May 30th, 1848 was the formal transfer of California to the United States.
So this guy is like 4 months too early in asking for these mineral rights.
News traveled pretty fast because, unfortunately, after Charles Bennett decided to run his slap-happy mouth all the time, March 1848, there's a merchant and newspaper publisher named Sam Brannan. Now, Sam Brannan is a dickhead. He gets his comeuppance because for all of the golden riches that he does end up making, he has a pretty unceremoniously and very poor and very destitute to his ending.
Who do you not want to find out?
Probably the guy that running the newspaper.
That runs a newspaper that has the ability to filter and disseminate information very quickly.
But he didn't, that wasn't even how he used it to stir up a little bit of love, but he hears about this and he's like, oh shit, well, if there's gold, I can either go out and break my back and try to dig up these gold nuggets and make my money that way, or...
I hate to say it, but this is the smart way to do it.
Oh, it's brilliant, but it's also a pretty dirtbag thing to do to raise prices 10 times over.
No, I agree with that. I'm just saying that if you did this and you were like one of the only people doing it, then yeah, this is how he made so much money. Because instead of, like Adam was saying, instead of going out there and actually mining for the gold himself, he's like, well, shit, once everybody arrives here, what are they going to need? Because they're going to be the ones that their sole focus is going to be mining.
Yeah.
They're going to need all kinds of equipment. So he basically goes around the entire area as far as his reach will allow him and just buys up all the mining equipment, pickaxes, shovel, pans, all that kind of stuff to sell to all of these people coming in. Now, looking kind of geographically where San Francisco is in comparison to where the actual, like what they consider like the gold fields or like the gold areas, San Francisco is going to be further south, and then on the coast of the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, we're talking, it's about 40 miles like northeast of Sacramento or San Francisco.
Yeah. So you're not going to have people coming in on these,
maybe Sacramento,
these wagon trains, things like that.
Yeah.
They're going to be going further than they need to. They're going to be heading straight to start mining for gold. What you are going to see is that it's not just people coming over on land from, the western states and everything. San Francisco becomes this is where the boom of San Francisco actually happens, because it becomes essentially the go-to spot for all of these people trying to seek their fortunes coming in. And this guy is there to sell them this equipment.
We'll talk about the boom numbers here in a little bit because they are fascinating. But Brandon broke out one pick, one shovel, one gold pan, headed to the American River, got himself some gold dust that he would put in a jar, and then he would head back to San Francisco, and he would basically just walk through the streets. He would set out his soapbox, and he would start screaming about the gold that was found on the American River, and when people didn't believe him, he would just hold up a jar full of gold.
To people that had never seen gold,
or
had maybe only seen it on somebody else for the brief glance that they had, to show somebody even a bottle that didn't have that much gold in it, but has gold flakes that even the ones you could swirl around in the bottle, that would be so fucking crazy to see and mesmerizing. Like, how when you see Goldschlager and everything, we have fucking alcohol that has gold flakes in it now. But there was a time when you showed someone a bottle with flakes like that, and they were just like, how do I get some of that? Like, what do I need to pay you?
Yeah. And to his credit, it worked pretty well in that first year. San Francisco at the time that he was doing this, a total population of around 1,000 people. San Francisco today is gigantic, and this is pretty much where the start to that rush happens. And after it happens, San Francisco kind of turns into a little bit of a ghost town because all you have to do is lose 1,000 people. But at the same time, it's not too tough to lose 1,000 people and just have nobody else there.
Mm-hmm.
At the height of this whole thing, after 1849, they would have issues because San Francisco being a port town, you would always have ships coming in and dropping stuff off there. Well, after people heard about the gold rush, eventually the ship's crew wouldn't be making it back onto the ships to the point where merchants used to have to chain them together so they couldn't get away individually.
And I get it. Okay, so and here's the thing. So San Francisco, because it's, you know, it's getting maybe some stuff overland, probably not really a lot. So a lot of its trade is actually with like the area that's like down in Mexico, some of the stuff with the Oregon territories, but this port town is so important, even though at the start of this, like Adam said, pre-rush population about 1,000, this is where a lot of merchant ships were coming in that came over from Hawaii or came over from China, came up from Australia, and were trading these different things. And you would essentially, once the gold rush started to you know, the fever started to catch on, you're just a deckhand. You're making hardly any money. But guess what? You pull up in San Francisco, you're excited to get off the boat and go enjoy the booming 1,000 person city. And you're walking around and this guy is shouting to you about this gold he found. And that gold that's even swirling around there, that's more than you would make in 2 voyages.
Oh, easy.
Doing the jobs you're doing. There's nothing keeping you from being like, where do I go for this? He gives you the information, sells you some shit, and you fucking just leave your boat. And it's not like the officers were leaving, but fucking 10 officers can't sail one of these boats. So,
No, if you run out of a group's worth of crew members and you know that you can't take that boat back, eventually, even if you are not the captain, but everybody else that works underneath it is probably like, well, we don't have a crew, so I'm just going to go maybe dig some gold too. Because even if you're in a lieutenant or a captain's position, there's not that hope of striking it rich and never having to do it again. Plus, you're not on the sea, which I'm sure has to be better.
So it got to the point where these ships would just be pulling up in San Francisco and wouldn't be able to get off the docks because they didn't have enough people to crew them. So they actually, due to also the boom in population, once this started catching wind, they started converting ships into like warehouses, stores, taverns, basically breaking down the ships, using the lumber to build these, or, you know, just recycling them basically and trying to turn them into housing in places for these, all of this, you know, supplies and stuff that were coming in for the gold rush had a place to be stored there.
Not to mention, I know it plays very little factor in this whole thing, but it kind of does if you think about it. If you've ever been to San Francisco, your climate's going to be pretty good most of the time.
Yeah.
You're going to get a lot of rain, you're going to get some fog and that type.
You're on the coast.
But you're never going to be freezing. Rarely are you going to be in triple digits. Like, it's just a very great climate to be in.
You're in that climate where it doesn't get to like disease humidity.
Yeah.
Where that kind of stuff will like destroy like a settlement and everything. You're kind of in the sweet spot there because it's also a huge harbor with a small, I mean, it's from a weather standpoint and everything like that. It's naturally almost just like perfect.
So you got to think sticking around in San Francisco probably wouldn't be the worst thing possible.
No, I mean, by 1850. So again, this is 1848 that we're talking. By 1850, it would be 25,000 people in San Francisco. So, and you're wondering, you know, did this all just come from this other newspaper guy that got this information out? No. So not only does it goes from this guy, Samuel Brennan, then in August of 1848, so it was able to stay kind of on the low down a little bit, maybe kind of just over to the West Coast. There hadn't been confirmation, so it was just stories that people were maybe hearing.
Yeah.
Well, what's going to happen when, you know, the New York Herald, which is probably at that point a major publication, prints a story about the discovery? Probably going to get people's ears perked up a little bit more. They're going to start paying attention. But what's really going to go and drive the point home is in December of 48 when President Polk confirms to Congress about the gold discovery. So now it has been legitimately confirmed and the mad fucking dash is on. And that's why in 1849, we get the 49ers. Now,
the football team?
not the football team. This is where in case you've always won, I guess people have always just assumed because their colors are gold and everything like that, or I don't know if it's just having more sports knowledge than most people, but this is where the 49ers get their name. Not only San Francisco because it was established essentially as a gold boom town, but also the fact that these guys that all came over in this next year, which is when this is when all the people in the wagons and horses, what you think of for 49ers, like the guys with the straw hats kneeling down near the creek and everything and doing the panning for gold. That's what you think of here. Am I just describing the 49ers mascot actually that roams the sidelines? Doesn't he carry a pickaxe and he has one of those hats?
So I'm sure that 49ers fans would probably try to claim the first Super Bowl ever won in 1849 if they could, because it's made of gold and they don't have a lot of very recent Super Bowl wins, so it's kind of tough to live in the past like they do.
As a Raiders fan, I'm not in any position to tell anybody about their last Super Bowl win.
Yeah, dude, this population move is incredible. So after Polk's confirmation that there's gold out there, that would spark the single largest migration of U.S. citizens ever, as well as this gigantic international migration.
Ever.
Yeah. The thing that hit me the hardest, and it took me about 4 times hearing it before I finally put it together. There were migrants from 21 states and 25 countries that would converge on this unofficial U.S. territory. And I was thinking about it. I was like, well, shit, 21 states? That doesn't seem like very much. At the time, there were 30 states. So there were only 9 states that didn't send people over there.
Yeah.
So most of the country was headed that direction, but 25 different countries.
It was up in the New England area. I'm guessing Connecticut, Maine, that area.
I think some of them came down. I think that there was a fairly decent movement. I do know that a majority of them came from the South. I'm sure just based on ease of getting there. And their routes all varied just pretty incredibly. Places like South America and Mexico, obviously, being on this western seaboard to where you could just take a ship up. China, very, very easy to get over, just crossing the Pacific. Hawaii was huge.
I wouldn't say easy. That's a lot of fucking ocean, and we're still in the 1840s.
It is, but remember what's going on in China in the 1840s.
Opium Wars, right?
The Opium Wars are going on. We're moving into the Taipei Rebellion that killed millions of people.
I didn't even put that together as far as the dates go, but isn't that crazy that Britain was fighting China because they wouldn't take their drugs at the same time that they're like, there's gold in California.
Well, you got to imagine that some of the sentiment that probably ended up in California was based upon the Americans that had been over there during the Opium Wars saying that these people are dirty opium addicts.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of hate comes from. But Oregon would also be another no-brainer because they're just moving down south.
Yeah, it kind of the order that it went in. It was local California people. 1848 flocked to all that. Then it was groups in Oregon. The Oregonians, several thousand of them came down. And then after that, it had gone international. Again, because this is also a port city and you have these ships coming in from other countries, they're going back and also telling those other people in other countries, hey, they found gold in this place. It's also not a state in the United States at this point. So rich people are like, industrialists or whatever that could afford to fund those things, or even just people wanting to try to build a new life for themselves would come over. This is like where we get the resulting cultural melting pot that like San Francisco is even known for today. And it's fucking crazy to think. I never pieced that ever together. I always assumed that it had more of that cultural diversity because it was on the West Coast and it was closer to or any of the ships coming in or like areas coming in for people migrating over would be coming over from areas where people don't look as much like us. So it's going to be more, easier to notice. But then to think that it actually happens because not only is there's this gold rush for everybody that's currently living in the existing United States at that point, but a huge population of people from other countries come in. Like you said, a lot of Asians, mostly Chinese, they knew it as the Gold Mountain. I forgot what the name was. I was going to mispronounce it, so I just wrote Gold Mountain. People from Chile. You had people from France coming over. I think they said that there was a huge amount of gold that was sent back over to France.
Oh, I'm sure. our friends down south, good day. The Australian showed up.
You got the Kiwis and the Aussies.
Very easy to get there. Again, not easy, but a pretty quick route.
God damn it. That's something we need to see. We need to see a goddamn Australian gold miner that he comes in and he's like, crikey, look at all this gold. I'm sorry for my horrible accent on that, but.
Well, we also talked about it during the Australian episode. This is kind of a precursor, I think, that led to some of the Australian gold rush too, because they had miners that had come over here.
We got to keep.
It was either before or after, but it was around there.
And I'm wondering if it was a legitimate thing down there. That's why we're going to have to look into it. But like, also at the same time, people that saw how people not mining the gold got rich. If you could start just the rumor.
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing after this, there were a lot of false rumors about different gold rushes just from people being like, I don't have to guarantee there's gold here. I just need to sell them the shit where they can dig for it themselves.
Well, this even, I think, was sort of the precursor to like, it definitely was to the Klondike gold rush in Alaska, to the Colorado gold rush in Colorado. And it was
fucking Seattle. The reason Seattle grew like that is because of the goddamn gold rush.
They were the staging city up in the Klondike rush. It is sort of ironic that the Spanish basically bled the Aztecs and the Mayans and the Incans of all their golden riches, but somehow overlooked the area that they had controlled in California.
That they already had.
Yeah, and maybe they just had such a glut of riches that they weren't out there looking, but they can kind of start to look at these mountain developments and look at these mountain ranges and think, well, if the Sierra Nevadas were big enough and tall enough that the gold that was pressed down in the Earth's crust before was able to rise with the mountains, I wonder if we can go check this out in Alaska. They find it in Alaska, boom, Klondike gold rush. They look at the Rocky Mountains in Colorado and like, well, shit, they're big too. Let's go look in there. You get another gold rush out of there. It's science.
So the geological explanation for it seems like they just made it really simple.
Yeah.
Basically, the gold that was formed essentially was erupted out because California used to be underwater. So essentially all of the magma and everything that was being pushed up from in the minerals and gold and everything that was being pushed up from underneath the mantle or whatever would then actually cool. And over time, that was then built up into land. And then over time, as California is known for, there's some tectonic activity there.
San Andreas Fault.
Yep. And as those would push together and push the mountains up, basically you'd be having this, mountain ranges rise up, erosion would happen, and these minerals, even just the small bits of them due to natural erosion and weather and everything like that, would then find their way into like the streams. So it wasn't just like the gold was like literally right there where they found it and it's sitting in a stream. It essentially had to work its way down from like veins, or this is where we get the term lode, not that lode, LODE. This is where we get the term lode because a lode is essentially not trying to find, quit fucking giggling over there. How old are you?
I had trouble when I first started writing the board because I wrote MINOR the first time and I was like, that's not it.
Okay.
It's the other one.
And essentially what you'd be wanting to look for is if you were smart about it, you would work your way up the mountain because that's essentially where the gold had to come from. And then I guess if you were really intelligent, you would try to determine where the rivers and the water and all that drainage comes from and try to track that back. And I'm sure that also was something that happened.
Yeah.
But getting to California, once this, rush kicks off, there's a couple different ways that people are getting there. It's not just the overland route. In fact, I think it ends up being only half the people that arrived there during the gold rush came by land from the east. So you had obviously that one, and that one traveled on the California Trail.
Now, let's hold that one for a second because I think we're going to talk about that one more. Let's start with the Cape Horn.
Okay. So the same way you would have to go ahead and get over into the Pacific Ocean if you were traveling across the Atlantic. You'd have to go around the Strait of Magellan, Cape Horn. Mm-hmm. You'd have to go down south along that, and then you're in the Pacific Ocean. That was the same way that they had to do shit back then. Panama Canal didn't come around for another, 100 years? Close to it? 150 or 120?
Yeah, 60 years because it was right around World War I.
Mm-hmm. But we also get a proto-Panama Canal because another way of getting over there was you would sail down to the Isthmus of Panama. You would then use like portage, canoes and everything to move your stuff, sometimes over land. And then there would be a ship waiting for you on the other side, load up your stuff, and then it would just take you up to the West Coast.
Well, the insane amount of time to go around Cape Horn from Cape Horn, I can't say that fast, from like the eastern seaboard, you were talking about a trip of 4 to 8 months traveling over 15 to 20,000 miles.
Depending on what you could afford.
Yeah.
The more you could afford, the faster your ship was going to be. And this wasn't a time, this actually kind of led to the development of like state rooms and shit like that. I kind of wonder, because I'm sure it did exist in the Mediterranean, like pleasure cruising, shit like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, an entire industry gets built of people, especially people with means, wanting to go ahead and travel down there. They make faster ships to do that. They start the introduction of classes in ships. They start having staterooms that are being used in these ships. And I kind of want to track back to see if this is like where we get the advent of like the fucking cruise line.
I would say this would probably be more, I think Mediterranean, just because it's a smaller amount of water.
And they've been doing it in that area for so long.
I think that's more of like the invention of a yacht.
Okay.
Whereas traveling across oceans or anything like that has to be where the cruise liner thought comes from.
Go. Okay. I like that rationale there.
But yeah, as opposed to the Panama Canal route, which would take you 2 to 3 months if you were lucky, because there was also a good chance that because you have these means to travel down there and you are more on the more affluent side, there was going to be a chance that you were going to get robbed on the way, or you get to the other side and there's no ships.
Or door number 3, what would somebody that lives with enough, means to be able to afford that version of it, that person probably wouldn't have like been out exploring, building up their immune system.
Yep.
They're probably susceptible to certain things like, I don't know, like malaria or like tropical diseases. And this isn't like you're just like, oh, we're going to hop on the ferry and then it's going to take us over to the other side. This is a days, if not weeks long journey.
Yeah.
To get over to the other side of it. And I'm sure they made it as easy as possible because they had quite a few people doing it. But at the same time, jungle don't care. You're going to fucking those mosquitoes. I'm sure malaria, they're like, yeah, it can either be, 4 to 8 months if you're going over Cape Horn. What do I have to worry about there? Well, storms, scurvy. Actually, scurvy had probably been taken care of at this point.
No, I'm pretty sure it was an issue like even on land. Because the miners would suffer from scurvy, not being able to afford vegetables to eat to get vitamin C.
Oh, that's true. Or you can take the 2 to 3 month version, but you might get malaria. They're like, what's that? And like, you might get malaria. They're like, what's malaria? They're like, it's nothing. It's going to get you the gold. They're like, okay, I guess if he says it's not that bad.
Does it kill people? Sometimes.
Not all the time.
You would also have a route through Nicaragua that was very similar to kind of this overland, or I guess, hybrid model of overland, but still by ship. This overland route is something that I don't know. It sucks hearing about it, but if you're one of the first crews out, it's probably better than if you're one of like the middle or the last. Because essentially the way that they would go would be they would travel from basically Missouri was a starting off point, just like they had with Lewis and Clark. You would cross over the northern plains.
We're talking about the California Trail now.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
So it's getting basically to this California Trail kind of over more on the western side.
So basically the California Trail follows the Oregon Trail all the way up to a certain point, because the Oregon Trail, of course, they're going to take a trail that's already been established and has maybe forts or a couple, places along the route. A little bit, maybe, I guess you would consider it safer just because maybe you're able to travel a little bit faster. But at a certain point, one of them's heading to the Oregon Territory and it needs to head a little more southwest to actually get to the gold fields. And that's where it breaks off. I think it was in like Fort Hall. Yeah, so it followed the Oregon Trail until the Hudson Bay Company's Fort Hall in Idaho on the Snake River. So, and then even after that, it was still like 1,200 miles, even after it split from the Oregon Trail, which they'd already traveled all the way to that point.
And this trip is a bitch because, like I say, You start off in Missouri, you go through the northern plains, probably pretty okay. Then you have to cross the Rockies. Then you have to go through the Great Basin. Great Basin is going to be places like Nevada, where everything is flat, everything is desert, and it just sucks.
Dry as fuck.
Yeah, because in the mornings, in the daytime,
the places that you drive through where they build maximum security prisons,
Yes.
and they have those signs out that say "Do not pick up hitchhikers."
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a situation where you're walking around in the daytime, it's 95, 96 degrees. Then if you're lucky. Then as soon as night falls, it's falling down to like 40 or 50 degrees. So you're sweating your ass off all day walking and then freezing to death at night. So that's just an absolute nightmare. Then after all of that, you have to find a spot that's lower down in the Sierra Nevadas to be able to cross through these mountains. And we're talking about only a few years, 3 years after the Donner Party. So I'm sure that's in everybody's heads. Now, this was something that they did. It was a rough route.
Well, wait. How quickly do you think word spread of that?
I think they knew about the Donner Party before they were headed over there for sure.
No. I'm sure they did, but I'm sure it didn't have the type of notoriety because the people that would have known about it would have continued on because they didn't get stuck in the past. I don't know if anyone headed back, and I don't know if I don't think there were any survivors. Is that the whole point of it? Oh, there were?
There were.
Oh, okay.
I think there was one or two that told the story.
Okay, there was, yeah.
Maybe not. I don't fucking know. We'll figure it out in the episode. But if you're one of the first groups out, you have your supplies and you're living off the land, you're eating off the land, you're following a trail that's less traveled, but you have all of the natural resources around you. If you head out 6 months after the first groups and you're following the same line, you're then having to dig out further into the brush off of the trail to find the natural resources that you need.
And you don't even know if you're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. You take off a year after, you basically have nothing but what you're bringing with you to sustain you across this whole entire way. Mm-hmm. And that becomes an issue for people as this trail kind of gets beaten down because you don't have the ability to let your oxen graze because there's just no grasses left over because they've been overgrazed by everybody else.
Anything that's left, the next one gets until there's nothing and nothing left. Yeah.
And you're also headed out to an area where basically, unless you're traveling with just family and friends, you're going out there with all of your competition for this gold. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that the State Department did, knowing that this was kind of a scary route to travel, was they basically allowed everybody to take a gun with them. So you have gun ownership in the hands of a bunch of people that don't understand how to carry guns and what to do with them. And there was quite a few incidental shootings from these guys who were like, oh shit, we're going through Native American country. We got to make sure and keep these things loaded. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden they set their guns down and one of them drops and discharges and shoots Johnny in the shoulder.
Or doesn't drop. Gets bumped lightly.
Yeah, anything like that. These routes were just so dangerous to take, but the juice was pretty much always worth the squeeze because once you get over there, it's not like you have to, it's expensive, but literally all you would need to start out with, and we can start talking about tools, is in the beginning, you would need a pan, you would need a pick, a shovel, sluices and screen boxes would kind of come on later. Cradles would be used, and all of these items that you wouldn't think about purchasing to carry because you had to have a light enough load to get across. You
had to make that decision of being like, okay, I can carry mining equipment, but for every pound of mining equipment, that's one less pound of food that I can bring with me. It's not like, it's, if anyone plays D&D, it's having the pack, and you can only fit so much stuff before you become encumbered and you can't move anymore. I'm sorry, I had to sneak that in.
It works.
So before we get to the methods and everything, which are crazy how the progression of that went.
Yeah.
So in 49, kind of overall, you end up having 90,000 people arrive in 1849, the 49ers.
Which I believe I heard this one time, and I think it was on a documentary, would have been the equivalent of the city of Philadelphia migrating to California 2 times over. So that current 1849 city of Philadelphia, the home of the, not the Phillies.
Independence Hall, Rocky
Yes,
Balboa.
Independence Hall, all of these places, the original capital of the United States before they were the United States. 2 of those cities over would be headed to California itself. That's so many people.
So, and that's half by land, half by sea arriving. They said 50 to 60,000 of those were Americans. So again, 40 to or 30 to 40,000 were people arriving from different countries.
1852, there were more than 20,000 Chinese migrants that had arrived in San Francisco. That's so many. Yeah, like you said, 40,000-ish were right around there, arrived by ship. The grand total of women that made the expedition was about 700.
Yeah.
That's not a lot. That seems like you got to be a pretty strong and strong-willed woman to make that trip.
That's a woman that the husband is like, you're going with me.
Yeah.
Like you're, and I mean, there were, some that were probably like, fuck this, I don't like how I'm being treated over here. If I have any opportunity to try to find even a little bit of gold, like I could start a new life for myself.
Well,
or if I have a skill set that not a lot of people have, I can go over there and just work a job that, if I am I'm good at sewing clothes or something like that, go over there and start like miners have to have fucking clothes.
Yeah. Kind of an unintended consequence and sort of them hitting the, I guess you would say, the female gold rush will come with the Constitution of California being signed.
Mm-hmm.
But just along this whole entire thing, by 1855, there were more than 300,000 people that had arrived in California. So we're talking a matter of 7 years, almost a third of a million people arrived in California. That is so much. By 1850, Sutter's Fort that he'd established had grown to a population of over 9,000 residents.
And then that's Sutter's Fort became Sacramento?
Yes.
Which capital?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's weird to think that that's essentially the capital was of, because that's essentially he was the kind of the closest populated area, closest to like the gold fields and everything like that. That was where people were going to be going. They may not have been coming in there and getting their supplies there, but once they got there, that was the closest place that they would need to come back to.
Well, if you think about it, everywhere along kind of the West Coast has unassuming capitals. Because you say California, you immediately think LA, you think San Francisco, you think San Jose, you think San Diego. Mm-hmm. Sacramento is not the first thing that you think of to become a state capital. In Oregon, I believe it's Salem, Oregon. That's the capital of Oregon, not Portland.
Or Eugene.
I don't think it's Eugene. I'm pretty sure it's Salem, but I could be wrong about that. Washington.
Olympia.
Mm-hmm. Over Seattle or Vancouver or any of those big cities that you hear of. And the reason that Sacramento becomes the capital is because they have enough infrastructure and they're almost close enough to the gold fields. I think I said San Francisco earlier. This was about 40 miles north of Sacramento is where the big gold fields were. But it had grown enough and it was a place that was established to where they would be able to hold the congresses for California to talk about statehood and things like that. So when you're the ones that are holding the congresses, eventually they're just going to be like, okay, well, Monterrey was Mexico's. We're not going to do that. San Francisco is further away from our goals here. So if we place it in Sacramento, we should be good.
Okay. So in that first year, got 90,000 people coming in. You were not fucking prepared for 90,000 people. The presence that essentially, like you said, like the chief U.S. officer, whoever was there, that person is in charge of, especially now that it's been signed over and it's this territory, you still probably haven't been like reinforced with enough people to keep the peace. So that leads to this first portion of the gold rush. It peaks in, I think, 1852, but right when it kicks off in 49, probably 50, you get a lot of lawlessness.
Well, you don't have a constitution. You have rules. You don't have laws.
Yeah, and it's basically just, this is where you think of if you want to kind of, I guess, what I think of as like a Western and everything, where you see the lawlessness and everything like that. I feel like this is more so where that was prevalent because you have people, it's not just arguing over land at this point, it's land with fucking gold on it. Mm-hmm. And if no one's around, like you stumble upon someone or someone's in the bar getting drunk with you and they're like, I found a claim, man. And you're like, oh, really? Where's it at? And he's like, oh, it's on the map. He's like, oh, cool. Okay. Well, have you like told anybody else about this? No. Let's go outside and have, I'll go grab you another drink. Do you think people just disappeared all the fucking time and were just found in ditches and then all of a sudden somebody else just happened upon the claim?
I don't know if it was necessarily that, but this is a perfect segue because do you know how claims were staked in the early days? Do you know why it was called staking your claim?
Because they had a stake.
You literally had four stakes
Mm-hmm.
that you would have to drive into the ground, and that was the area of land that you had within those four stakes. Now, you could keep your stake if you were actively mining that area. So you would have to be out there on the daily doing your mining, which would lead to smaller stakes being claimed because you had to work that land.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had too big of a swath of land and you're not working part of it,
Yeah.
you could end up losing that stake to claim jumpers or anybody else. And also, along those lines, the issues that would come up and arise would usually end up in violence because, like you say, there was no governing body to look at this.
There's no cooler head, or there's
No.
no like. It would be very easy to escape any of the repercussions that you would normally face when there was some type of established governing body.
Well, yeah, eventually the arbitrators of some of these disputes were just other prospectors that didn't have like a stake or they weren't involved in the situation. And if those guys
have a stake in their claims,
yeah, if those guys were feeling frisky, they could really do whatever they wanted. So there wasn't like a uniform way to settle these things until 1850. And this blows me away because out of pretty much how this would work, and I'm going to lay this out, it was mostly based on population, but in order to become a state, you had to be a territory first. To be a territory, you had to have a certain amount of
you had
people.
to have a little trial basis.
Yeah, it was like, I want to say it was like 6,000 people or something like that you had to have in the area. And then based upon your population growth, which I believe was 60,000, you could apply for statehood. California was so important that it just went ahead and skipped over the territory and went straight into trying to form a state. Now, part of that was because the population had boomed so fucking fast that they already had enough people for statehood, but you didn't even get like a little test drive in the territory phase. It was just like, okay, well, we need to get laws in order here because these people are tearing themselves apart going for the gold.
I think part of it was that. I think it was sold as that, and I think that makes sense. Part of me, though, based on so many of the previous episodes we've done, Louisiana Purchase, and kind of finding out like why they're trying to do these land grabs, if you're looking over and you know that that's the furthest portion west that the area you're going to have is, if you could skip over all that middle stuff, that would be the preferred method of doing it because then you could go secure that area, which would be, the only weakness. And then all of a sudden you just pinch it. And exactly is what happened. Essentially, it grows now from the West Coast inward and everything just kind of closes up.
Fill
in
in
the
the blanks.
You're basically just doing that. And so fast tracking this, not only because of like, okay, shit's getting crazy over there. They have a ton of people over there. We need to get some form of governance, and a territory probably is inappropriate for this because there's already so many people over there, and it's not gonna. And also, to be honest, having that as a state and in a situation where then that state, we could be pulling in resources from that state and everything. It's beneficial for everyone to just fucking speed this thing up. Let's go, 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 go.
Yeah, all of our money in the United States was based off of gold. It was backed by gold. We were on the gold standard. So if you could bring a ton of gold into the country and into the nation and into the bank accounts, basically, you could print more money. So you were just a very viable country to be able to bring in that much gold at once. So 1850, the California Constitution is ratified and statehood is granted. Now, I don't know what episode this is going to fit into. This is sort of shitty. California becomes the 31st state. There's issues back in Congress about statehood being granted because there were 15 slave states, there were 15 free states. The slave states were concerned in making California a non-slavery state because that would then give the balance of power to the northern states and they would be able to potentially go after the slavery element of these states in the South.
That'll be settled a couple years down the road.
So we come up with this 1850 compromise. President Zachary Taylor was kind of the main architect behind it. Zachary Taylor ends up dying before this gets taken up by the House because of indigestion caused by a day outside of heat stroke and then eating too many cherries and too many glasses of iced milk.
Cream.
Sounds absolutely disgusting until you think Ben and Jerry's nailed it with Cherry Garcia.
Yeah, like throwing on that much fat from the dairy and then the natural diarrhea inducement that comes along with eating a lot of cherries.
Yes.
But then like not being able to shit, maybe because the dairy has backed you up so much.
It's creating the perfect storm in your stomach.
Yeah, exactly.
Not to mention you're fighting off heat
It's a
stroke
hell
at
in
the
a
same
cell
time.
if your stomach is what's going on.
What's the thought process there? Like it's really hot outside and you're sweating, so milk, so dairy, not just water? Seems
I think because of like how the milk was processed at the time, it would be akin to eating like cherries and cream or like fruit
could
and cream.
be. Still not a
I'm guessing
a
he
deadly
had to,
combination.
But how much of this shit is this guy eat? Like that's a lot of probably a lot of cherries and a lot of cream.
And we don't know if he was spitting out the pits or he was eating those along too.
Full throating them.
President Zachary Taylor ends up dying, and he is replaced by his Vice President Millard Fillmore. The compromise had kind of fallen apart down to its ideas that the oncoming territories would have self-determination when it came to the idea of slavery. There were a few other things that we'll talk about that were amendments that they kind of pushed out of the way and handled kind of in separate bills instead of just one big omnibus.
Yeah, so basically, in a nutshell, there was the dispute over, who's going to go ahead and get that tiebreaker or whatever it was for either slave state or non-slave state. The Compromise of 1850 essentially was just that. I think some area was carved off of like Texas or something like that. Again, it'll get its own due. But a compromise was reached to essentially get California to get into or have statehood as the 31st state.
Yeah. So in order to celebrate this, California fires off a 31-gun salute to mark being the 31st state. And we have statehood granted to this area that's so far away from anything else that the United States touches that even though it has its own constitution...
But it's theirs.
Yeah, it also doesn't have the ability to, like, grow a big law enforcement force still.
Yeah. All right, so... Probably going to get into the methods of how the actual gold rush and how this stuff was discovered. But before, let's take a bathroom break.
Okay.
Oh my God, Adam! What is that up in the sky? It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's socials. Oh my God! It's faster than Instagram.
That's historically high pod on Instagram.
More powerful than X.
It's historically high, historically HI on X.
Able to leap tall threads in a single bound.
Back to historically high pod on Threads.
And, I mean, I guess there's still Gmail, right?
We got that too. That is historically high podcast at gmail.com.
All right, guys, back to the show. All right, we've heard about how they get there. Now, how did they blast this shit out of the mountains? So anyway, I started blasting.
This is where the real shitty part of Brennan's plan comes into play and ends up making him a ton of money, is all of these supplies that they're going to need. And we're not even just talking about that. We're talking about just the inflation of prices of all necessities that you need to go out there. It's food. It's someplace to live, a tent that you're going to be in. Fresh water, I'm sure, is an issue, or some way to pots and pans to boil your own water to make sure that it's all good and safe. And these items are being marked up 3 to 4 times the amount of money that they would cost anywhere else. And it's just price gouging for the sense of supply and demand. It's, basic economics. Brennan ends up making a ton of money at this kind of trading post mercantile outlet that he has by the American River. And when they get over there, the gold is fairly easy to mine because most of it's on the surface. You can get to it by just hand digging, throwing that gravel into a gold pan. I've actually done this method before, and this is where I go back and forth on this, is I feel like this would be really bad for me because the obsession with finding the gold, I think, would drive... Like, if I can live through getting there, if I wasn't just living there, and then starting to do it, I feel like I would never know when to quit. But actually having done gold panning in high school, my buddy had a grandpa that liked to go up and do it up in the mountains. And we went the first time, and I was like, this is going to be so cool, dude. We're going to find gold. My buddy's like, yeah, it's not quite like that. My grandpa likes to go up and have a good time. So first time we go up there, it's boring as shit for like the first couple hours. We aren't finding anything. And then Gramps is like, well, you can't be a prospector unless you have yourself a beer. I'm like 17 at the time, and I'm looking at Grandpa. Grandpa pulls out his cooler, and he's got a 6-pack of Olies in there. And he goes, each one of you boys can have one while we do this, just so you're real prospectors. I was like, sweet. So I just kept going for the one free beer. Like, we never really found much gold, but the one free beer was kind of my gold
You found
rush.
something more important in that cooler.
Yeah. And these people just think about walking out there, taking 2 scoops of gravel out, throwing them in your gold pan, and pulling out not like marble-sized pieces of gold, but just gold flakes that you can add up, because it doesn't matter if it's a nugget, it doesn't matter if it's flakes, as long as that weight adds up, you're making money. And at this point in time, in East Coast, like if you were working outdoors on the East Coast, they said that your total salary a day would be about $1 a day.
Yeah.
And these guys, if you hit one decent sized gold nugget, you're making $12 to $14 a day. So you're making 10x what you would on the East Coast being a laborer outside.
And when they're arriving there, of course, the people that are back in San Francisco talking about how much gold they made are the people that made enough to get back and just be hanging out in San Francisco. I'm making $30 a day. You're not hearing about the thousands of people just living up in the hills trying to pan for this shit, like on a small scale. And I mean, at first they get their system down. They know where to look. They're searching essentially gravel beds that know where the high water marks are, like where they come around bends in the river, because essentially that's where, when the rivers are higher, stuff would settle. And so they're really just almost just picking it up off the ground to begin with. They're digging a little bit. And then when that ends up not really working, and enough time goes by, you're going to get people that are going to be coming in and basically creating these large scale operations. And this is where you get something called, it's placer mining, right?
Yeah. We have a little bit in between there from this surface mining to where it's just basically a shovel, a pick, and a pan.
Okay.
You run into a situation where you start using something called a cradle and a sluice. Now, it's just basically doing the same thing, except for you're moving more. You would have these cradles that you would load the gravel up in. You'd rock them back and forth. It would have a screen system in it. The smaller rocks would end up falling down. You'd be able to see the bigger things in the screens. Eventually, it would fall down into the sluice. You add water to the sluice. It runs off all of the dirt and everything off of it. So you're just basically,
water's coming down the sluice, and you're just shoveling this stuff into the sluice, washing it down into the screen system that then rocks and shifts to separate the gold.
Yep. And the gold's always going to stay at the bottom, because since it's a metal, it should be heavier and harder for it to flow out with the water. You then take all of the, basically just the finest amount of gravel, basically sand that you have, you throw that in the pan, you start washing it out, and you start looking for the gold flakes. And the invention of this whole cradle and sluice method is because it's getting harder to find, so you have to start digging down further. You have to start putting more effort into it.
You got to start processing more.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just coming off the ground anymore. Now you can't see it, and you're not going to be just picking through the dirt. You need to have a method in which you can basically do this on not a mass scale, but as mass as you can get for like a couple man operation, if not a single person operation.
Yeah, you're run off of the work of your own back at that point.
Yeah.
And every one of those shovelfuls is another opportunity to pull out more gold. And so this is kind of the method until this just kind of becomes something that's obsolete, because you have to figure out how to move this faster. It's no longer a 2-man operation that can be as viable unless you're on a vein. One of the other things about prospecting or staking claims was they said that a lot of old abandoned claims would be retaken after the invention of these sluices and cradles, because it was just people that were going along the surface. If they couldn't find anything in that area, they were moving on to try to to stake another claim.
If there was gold there initially, then chances are it's just hiding a little deeper.
Yeah, there's going to be an opportunity to be able to go back and dig deeper to make more out of it. That eventually is going to give way to something called hydraulic mining, or
it's placer mining first.
Okay.
So the placer mining is just taking the idea of the gold settling in the riverbed, and when you're trying to get it out of the riverbed, essentially it's the areas in which the low water, or essentially the high water mark is, to where that area has to be exposed for you to actually mine it or like pick the gold out. Well, they're looking over and they're like, we know there's gold in the riverbed. We just can't access this other area of the riverbed because the fucking river's right here. So placer mining is when essentially you would divert the water and basically just have this area when the river's been diverted, and you'd have the exposed riverbed, and you would essentially dig down and take like the top 12 to 18 inches from the riverbed, and then basically on a larger scale kind of do exactly what you're saying. They would have that stuff where they could, send it down the sluices and into like the rocker machines, which at that point had probably become larger and could process more. But you were basically redirecting this water, and then you would just continue to do that. Then you would have to redirect it lower downstream because then you would need to expose that. And I know that this sounds stupid, but you literally, and at this point, there's never in any of these situations any regard for what is happening around.
Environmental impact is not two words.
It's not even a phrase that anybody is familiar with. But when we look back on stuff like this, you can imagine and this isn't just like this river getting diverted. It's any of these areas with streams and everything around the entire, Sierra Nevada area and all these gold fields that even today, from how much, I guess, change to the topography happened during the mining, there's still areas where like heavy metals and other minerals have been washed out due to what we're going to talk about next, that it can't grow vegetation. And so they're like these weird, just barren landscapes that were caused by like this mining during the gold rush.
Yeah, and you can still see these scars in the land today. That was how much damage that they were doing. And we'll talk about some of the methods that have kind of rendered some of these places like uninhabitable for any wildlife or vegetation.
Also, I forgot about this one. Did you read about coyoteing? So coyoteing was basically, they would have it kind of like went hand in hand with placer mining when they were having trouble finding stuff just in that 12 to 18 inches.
Yeah.
You essentially, next to like the area where you would find the gold deposits in the river, they would dig these mines going straight down, and it would basically be like 20 to 40 feet deep in a placer deposit. And then you would go down to the bottom and dig tunnels out in all different directions until you found like a vein or something like that. So you're digging this tunnel and then going under where there was a fucking river flowing above you. Like how, and I know once you get 40 feet down, it's probably pretty hard as shit, the rock and everything like that. But still, to be someone that's willing to go down there into that, because even to reinforce that area, you would have to have lumber and access to all that kind of stuff.
Which is unfortunate because Sutter's Mill went tits up when everybody left.
Yeah, with a fucking lantern or something, trying to go down there and just tick, tick, tick and hope you're not getting a fucking cave in.
Not to mention oxygen is going to be less the further you go down. Mm-hmm. Like it's very sketchy to just think about how far these guys would go for it. And we move from placer mining to hydraulic.
Yep.
Hydraulic mining is going to be the next step. So within the first 5 years, so basically pan mining, hand mining, surface mining, and then into these cradles and this placer mining.
Are you saying pan mining didn't pan out?
No, it did, because there were estimates of 12 million ounces of gold that were removed in the first 5 years. 12 million ounces of gold. It's billions of dollars today. And this was the first initial 5 years. And we're going to see how, as you have to go deeper, the returns aren't going to be as good, but they're still going to be in the billions of dollars. 1853, Edward Madison would be the first to use something called hydraulic mining. It's basically taking a jet of water at a high pressure that's traveling through
canvas
hoses. It had to be like waxed canvas or something like that.
You think of it in the same way that, like, have you ever seen a fireman's hose?
Yeah.
Same, like they're coated in canvas for like being tough and everything. But this is at a time when you can't manufacture something like that. You're literally just like, that's nuts.
Yeah.
It was basically giant fire hoses is what it was.
And these hoses had to be hundreds of feet long, because this whole thought eluded me. And I knew that I just kept putting it off because I didn't really know if I was going to understand it. But hydraulics weren't a thing back in 1850. Basically what they would do would they would have these big retention ponds that were up on the tops of the mountains and the hills, and then hundreds of feet below it you would run the hose all the way down. So basically you would be using the pressure of the water flowing down a certain amount of drop, and that would be pressuring the hose out into this it wasn't metal, maybe it was a brass nozzle that would then concentrate it to where you'd be able to spray these. I mean, they weren't the strongest jets of water that you've ever seen.
No, you can actually see images if you look it up. You can also see, kind of look up some of this placer mining from the gold rush and kind of see like it just looks like the river just stops, goes to the other direction, and then it's just completely destroyed underneath. But basically what they're doing is the gold came down from the hills due to erosion. How do we speed up the process of erosion to find more of this gold?
Big ass hose.
They're just going to use big ass hoses. And so they would just blast like the sides of these hills with these hoses and just basically wash away all like the topsoil and kind of anything that could be removed by the PSI of that water, however much it was going to be broken up. And then they could then take all that material and also run it through to try to pull the gold out of here.
They had just massive sluices at the bottoms of these mountains that would start, or these hills that would start to collect all of this sediment that's coming down. And then you're running it through these big sluices to be able to extract this gold. There were certain other methods that would be used too. I'm struggling on which one it was.
Well, while you're looking that up, just one thing kind of about the hydraulic mining so nature's erosion is going to be over time. It's going to be due to rainfall, things like that, snow melt. When you're speeding up that process, there's a certain balance within the fact that during erosion, everything, heavy metals are getting brought down from the mountaintops, just like with gold and everything like that, but not in such quantities that it's actually killing off like the area around it. Like nature's adapted to the fact where it can handle this much load of heavy metals and it can still thrive or do what it needs to do. When you're speeding up that process and all of a sudden in mass quantities, you're moving all of these heavy metals in these huge mining operations, it's not recoverable because you're also sending all of that material down these sluice gates. And yeah, while they're, sorting out all the gold and everything, all that other shit is just being dumped around that immediate area and just like piled up.
Not to mention you get the pollutants that come into play because you're using quicksilver, you're using mercury to extract these gold flakes out of minerals. And mercury is obviously very bad for waterways. You always hear about fish with high mercury levels and you're not supposed to eat them.
Terminator 2, man, that whole thing was made of mercury.
That's a good point, yeah.
Trying to kill John Connor.
And this mercury that stayed in these riverbeds in kind of these areas where it was used to extract the gold from these rocks is pretty much like you can't disturb it at all because it's rested down enough into the like riverbeds to where if it gets disturbed and gets back up into the water, it's going to cause massive problems.
Aside from, another 200 years when it works its way into the aquifers. When it keeps working its way down.
Yeah, that's a problem for another day.
Yeah.
But
let those crazy kids deal with that.
Some of these areas where they use these pollutants in the rivers still to this day are completely sterile. There's sides of these mountains where they were spraying these hydraulic water jets where there's just nothing that can grow because every mineral that was in that soil that could hold a plant is just washed away.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to think that...
It makes for a hell of a fucking ski resort.
Oh, I'm sure.
Just clear runs all day.
Yeah, you get a tree or something like that in the way, it's few and far between. Another thing that they would do, the hilarious, exactly what you would think of when you think about mining gold, is called hard rock mining. They would drill the holes in the sides of the mountains. They would throw some TNT down there, blow up the side of the mountain. You would get large abundances. You basically try to find a gold vein by finding quartz that surround it. You would end up breaking into the quartz. You would then pull that back as your hard rock that you would then beat with a pick to pull it apart to break up the quartz and then separate the gold from there.
They got to the point where they were doing mass like quartz crushing.
Yeah.
Just trying to speed up the process. Basically just giant fucking picks, except it was smashing everything and then just sorting through the gold.
But I immediately think back to this had to have been the start of like Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, where they lay out the dynamite and then they roll out the cordage to the big box with the handle that you push down.
Kind of feel like that.
Yeah, like that had to be. I wonder who got to blow that up. It had to have been like the foreman
You're
or
talking
something
about
like
the
that.
plunger.
Yeah, the plunger. Exactly.
Yep, exactly. They would dig holes in there. They would fucking stack up the dynamite. They would run the little cord out. They would hook it up, like Boris and Natasha, Bullwinkle and Rock.
Trying to blow up the train tracks. Yeah.
Moose and Squirrel. But yeah, and again, this is happening on such a massive scale. You got to imagine how many people. I didn't even see the death statistics for guys that were trapped in cave-ins,
Tons.
blown up in these fucking demolition fucking.
That was where Madison came up with this whole idea of this hydraulic mining. Was he was working at the bottom of a hillside when a rock slide happened.
Okay.
And then after that happened,
There's got to be a better way.
Yeah, well, and then he looked up. He's like, well, shit, look at all this gravel that just fell down here. If we can figure out a way to do this ourselves without standing at the bottom of the hill during the rock slide, everything should go a lot better. Through this entire time, it was by the mid-1880s, there were more than 11 million ounces of gold that were mined by hydraulic mining. So again, hand mining, placer mining, and all these other developments that they had, 12 million ounces, ton in the first 5 years.
They said by hydraulic mining, by the mid-1880s, over $15 billion, and I think they said in 2010's standard, was recovered, which means it's even more expensive now.
Probably 18 and a half at this point. But it's just so much money that's flowing out through this. And kind of the crazy thing was the gold was super important, but I don't know if it was the most important part of this.
It's going to be a stupid question, maybe. So the gold essentially is as a result of the landmass, being formed by volcanoes over millions of years, all that.
Yeah.
The fact that essentially California, that area, was, the same way the gold was silicon, right?
Yeah.
Is that also a byproduct of those eruptions pushing minerals out? And then that's how essentially Silicon Valley had those deposits? I don't know how silicon is formed. If someone could answer that, that would be fantastic.
Well, I don't think that's what Silicon Valley was meant.
No. It was because of that's where they developed and that's where they stationed it. Silicon Valley was where all the technology was created. I'm aware of that. What I'm saying is the reason they called that Silicon Valley is because all of the microchips were made with silicon that was actually found in that area. I
got some fun shit I got to tie in.
Okay.
I'm going to get this story wrong, probably not completely. So Stanford University was founded by a man who worked the gold rush and made a ton of money, and then was the guy that drove in the golden spike at the end of the Transcontinental Railroad. Then started Stanford University, which produced all of the tech bros that would then populate that area and start their businesses.
So it says, yes, there was once silicon in Silicon Valley, but now there is more software than silicon.
Yeah. So the dude that started Stanford in Palo Alto and then grew this whole business and tech industry through their university, everybody stayed around there. And that's where you get all these tech startups is coming out of places like Palo Alto. Mm-hmm. So you kind of get a complete circle with Stanford being a part of the gold rush, then creating the college, then creating the second digital gold rush coming through.
Mm-hmm. Well, not only that, but then there's multiple gold rushes that they consider, because the one that happened after this, once all the shit died down, was the agricultural one, because now you had all of these people there. And what do you have to do? You have to create all this agriculture to actually feed them and develop the land. This is also some of the crazy shit we get into that makes perfect sense on how things are established the way they are in certain areas of California. California wines. People that were coming over from Europe and everything, especially from France, and coming over and wanting to take over areas of land for the mining and stuff like that, or to even open businesses, were bringing grapes over from France and putting them in the areas that would then become Napa Valley and everything, and creating those wineries. The reason they were creating with those wineries is because there were so many people coming over there for the gold rush, is that they had an already established clientele, and they could be one of the first ones to actually, establish themselves in that area.
Yeah, what you're talking about, I think, is the most important part of the gold rush. The gold was important, but what it did to transfer over California from being this rough and tumble gold rush town to kind of a place of industry, because, like you say, you have to be able to feed these people. And if you're out there gold mining and it doesn't go well for you, and you know that you don't have anything at home, you have to be able to figure out another business pivot to try to make money. So this is where it gives way to the agriculture industry, because it becomes more important to feed these people. They said at one point in time, like just one single solitary egg was $1 an egg.
A slice of bread, and also like not together. Each one at one point cost $1. So yeah, you think fucking inflation is bad now about fucking egg prices. This used to be a lot worse back in the gold rush.
Think of $12 a dozen.
Yeah,
when you're only making potentially like $6 a day.
Yeah.
So it takes you 2 days to buy a dozen eggs.
Well, and by 1870, by the 1870s, it essentially was the lead industry in California. And the pivot...
Agriculture?
Yeah, and when you think about the pivot, it's not that difficult because you have all of this industry now that has been used for like redirecting water, being able to go ahead and use probably like the hoses and stuff like that for irrigation, the stuff that you've been using to try to like sift through the land and break up earth. You can use that to break up stuff on a property to plow it for fields and everything like that. So they're pivoting this like knowledge that they were using during the actual gold rush itself and being like, oh, we can kind of just like redirect some of this or kind of retrofit some of this technology and use it for agricultural purposes. And the gold rush is slowing down a little bit, but you know, this is still making us a ton of money. And because everybody needs this, not just people wanting to mine gold, like this could be a lot more viable option.
The rise in merchants coming over to sell. They called this mining the miners, because if you had the resources that the miners needed when they came back to town, whether it was doing laundry, a barber shop, a restaurant, a boarding house, anything like that, you're going to be able to make money off of these people. Because if you got a guy that's coming back into town, he needs a shower and a shave and a place to sleep, or he is going to go tie one on at the saloon and sleep there.
Go find himself a special person for lady favors.
Yeah, a whorehouse, a brothel. You're going to have these dudes that are rolling into town with jars full of gold and really no ability to say no to what they want because they think they have all the money that they're going to need. Gambling was huge.
Well, did you read what the meal was whenever you hit it big or whenever you like had a big find?
Probably vegetables?
It's called a Hangtown Fry. And what it was is it was like the most expensive thing on the menu that these places would have. It was an omelet with bacon and oysters, because those were like the 3 most expensive items that you could order to eat. And so if someone was eating a hangdown fry, it's because they just, hit it big.
That sounds disgusting.
Also, I want to say that this actually was kind of around the time of the introduction of sourdough bread to San Francisco, that it was actually brought over.
Yeah.
And sourdough was like really popular because you could essentially, buy a loaf of it, and then the miners would literally just eat on a loaf all day.
You need calories to be able to sustain yourself out there.
Because sourdough establishes a thicker crust, doesn't it actually the inside will stay edible longer?
It holds better. You basically if you have a sourdough starter, you can just continue to feed it. The reason that it works so well, and this is kind of like a New York City bagels are the best because you use New York City water, and New York City water is treated differently. The altitude at sea level for sourdough changes its flavor. And so that's why you have something that's so unique, because altitude affects sourdough just because of the rising process. And they would be this bread was a hearty enough bread to where it could stay good longer. I don't know if it was because it was a thicker crust that kept the inside more malleable at the time, but they were just kind of hearty loaves of bread for guys that were going out and working in hardy conditions all the time.
Yeah.
Just to think about, like, that's your meal for the day to do all this work. Is you might have like a barrel of pork that you can pull a little bit of pork out of. You have a loaf of sourdough bread that you have to make last throughout the day. And that's your only fuel. That and the desire to just continue to hit gold.
Yeah.
Because there were so many times that some of these stakes were so close that people would be willing to just be on the verge of giving up and want to get out of there. And then you just start hearing somebody screaming down the way, and you try to figure out what's going on, and you look down there and they pull a nugget out of the ground. You're like, fuck, okay, 10 more shovelfuls, and then we'll see what goes on. And you have these interactions between these dudes that it's almost like a competition of who can stay in it the longest.
Well, and it's not just competition between the people that we're kind of thinking of. Like when you think of like miners, you know, having disputes with other miners. Again, there's a lot of people from different countries here, people that don't speak the language that people coming over from the, you know, eastern states do, and also feel like because this is their state, they're encroaching on their territory. Chances are some of these people were probably over here doing this kind of stuff before you were doing it technically, and then as they were there, it became a state. But there was just a ton of fucking, of course, there's going to be just like rampant racism and everything and discrimination against anyone that essentially isn't white. Basically, the old ploy of being like, these people are stealing your opportunities.
Are we ready to jump into the discriminatory side?
Not quite that
Okay.
yet. I do just kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit. But this is also where you get things like, you know, being advertised as the California dream. The California dream was to make it out there and strike it rich with gold.
Which only inflamed the American dream.
Exactly. You get the name the Golden State. You get why Eureka is on the seal for California. And oddly enough, not where you get the Golden Gate Bridge. I actually had that written down, Golden Gate Bridge, because I was so fucking sure that that's how it got its name. But no, please explain that.
What was the dude's name? John C.
I can't remember. Okay, so this guy was essentially like a naval captain, right?
Yeah, John C. Fremont.
John C. Fremont.
He was a United States Army officer, explorer, and politician. He was a United States Senator from California and was the first Republican nominee for President of the United States in 1856. He was also the founder of the California Republican Party. As he's coming through San Francisco, he sees the strait across that the Golden Gate Bridge is that leads you basically onto the isthmus, I guess you would call it, of San Francisco. And when he looked at it,
like where Golden Gate State Park is and all that kind of stuff.
He claimed that was the Golden Gate to trade with the Orient. And also there was something about it was reminded them of straits from the Byzantine Empire. Something that was called the Golden Strait or the Golden Gate, something like that. But he does this like 1846.
Yeah.
So 2 years before the gold rush happens, he just happens to name this the Golden Gate Bridge.
Or Golden Gate Strait, or like the Strait of,
Which
the Golden Strait, I'm guessing, is probably what it was.
We'll talk about it. We do an episode on building that because I'm sure it was incredible. How do you do that? How do you build that bridge? Do you take a boat across, obviously, and then eventually you're like, well, let's string some ropes across and then let's raise it up. How do you build that bridge?
I can do it really quick.
Okay.
Okay, you build the pylons. You build the towers. Then what you do is you run essentially the big, huge suspension cables that connect each of the towers to the ones on land.
I'm talking like the first one, though. How do you initially construct it?
How do you get that first suspension loop over there? I assume, like you said, you would probably have to take it over on a boat, and then you would have to use cranes to lift it and raise it up to be able to then connect it and do the same with the others. Because once you had those up, then you're dropping the suspension cables down, and then you actually just go and establish a framework hanging from the suspension cables and then start laying your roading on top of that. I'm not a structural engineer. That's just how it makes sense to me.
Well, and you would almost have to wait for the technology to catch up to be able to do it. So it was probably a lot of boat transfer
That's
across.
why it's still so fucking famous, is because it still looks like, damn, that's like that's really impressive.
And it's double-decker, isn't it? It's 2 layers?
No. I don't believe so. I think you're thinking like maybe like one of the bridges in New York.
Okay.
A lot of those are
Double-deckers.
yeah, because they're also going over shorter distances over just rivers.
Yeah, I'm fairly sure from pictures of the earthquake, but I definitely could be wrong because I think that was a big issue with the earthquake was the top layer had gone down and collapsed onto the bottom. During the earthquake, I think there was one in 89 that happened.
There's other bridges, though, that are like that connect like Oakland to San Francisco and that cross other areas. Because that kind of place is built up like with a lot of that Bay Area interspersing and like going further inland.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess at this point we've talked about everything else, but the effect essentially not just, we've already kind of discussed the effect on the actual land that occurred by this, but as always, there are people living on that land when this happens.
Yeah. And a lot of these miners that couldn't make it out of the field would often move back to the cities. They would become merchants. They would start working in the service industry. Chinese immigrants were treated very poorly out in the field. They would pretty regularly be robbed. They would be beaten. Their claims would be stolen. And that was just what was going on, kind of like frontier justice.
Mm-hmm.
In 1850, along with the Constitution being passed, they also passed a law called the Foreign Miners License Law. Now, this was basically set up so if you weren't a citizen of the United States, you would be paying $20 per month to have this license. This was mainly geared towards the Chinese because they were the largest group of immigrants that were there. There would be an additional foreign miners tax that would add an additional 4% to any transactions that they were trying to make. So not only did you have to purchase this license that no other U.S. citizen had to purchase.
There was a markup on you to get your necessities to actually use the license.
Exactly. Yeah. Anything that you turned in, you were giving away 4 extra % that a regular white guy wouldn't have to give. A regular U.S. citizen wouldn't have to give. Mm-hmm. This also gives way to something in 1882, a lot later on, called the Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned Chinese immigration completely. And I don't know exactly where it lines up with Angel Island. We'll find that out during the Ellis Island, Angel Island episode of Chinese migration, but Angel Island was the western port, essentially the Ellis Island of the West, that handled a lot of the immigration that came in from Asia.
Which, I mean, you never think about that. You think of Ellis Island because New York, people coming over from Europe, and so many people being able to, like, it's always the thing like, oh, can I go to Ellis Island? Can I find the neighborhood? I trace my ancestor back when they arrived. But we're two-ended. There was also all that immigration happening essentially over on, and it wasn't as like prominent because the East Coast had already been established for long, before that. But still, of course there would be a place like Ellis Island for people coming in.
Because you're not traversing all the way around South America again just to try to pull up into Ellis Island.
Yeah.
They faced a hell of a lot of racism. This is sort of where we kind of get the ideas. I don't want to say job roles being pigeonholed, but a lot of dry cleaners, I think, are Asian folks. And this was a job that they took to pretty well over there by doing laundry, because you wouldn't have places where laundry would be accessible. You would probably stink to high hell after a week. Mm-hmm. So as you're going back into town, you need somebody to be able to clean your stuff so you can go get it stinky again the next day.
Yeah.
And these Asians that had to leave the mines because they were being harassed and threatened and killed would have to find work because they still had to try to send money home. And going back to China again during these times when you're dealing with the Opium Wars, you're dealing with so much just upheaval around there that you're going to try to stick around. You're going to make it happen. They would start restaurants. Chinese restaurants, I would say, are probably the most popular ethnic restaurants in the United States.
Mexican.
Yeah, I think that's just our location, maybe. I don't know if there's a lot of Mexican restaurants in Nebraska.
Both are fantastic.
Also, there might not be a lot of Chinese restaurants in Nebraska.
Yeah.
But they take on these roles, and they're still able to ink out a living and make this all happen. Another group that wasn't immigrants, that were actually the OGs of the area, the Native Americans, did not suffer a very good fate.
Well, kind of going back to the Chinese immigration and everything, just like it was, people coming in from the East Coast and everything, when they would come in, the reason you get certain areas in New York that were more prominent, you would have your Italian neighborhoods, you would have your Irish neighborhoods, all that kind of stuff. The same thing happened like in San Francisco. That's why essentially you have a Chinatown in San Francisco. And I mean, that would be a place because you want to be where people, you feel more comfortable around people, you feel like you're not so far from home because all of your culture is there. You're not going to spread out. So you still get kind of all of this coming and basing it off like the gold rush is just crazy to see why, why there's this, town within a town.
Yeah, Chinatown.
Yeah.
I also forgot to mention it was illegal for a U.S. citizen to marry a Chinese person. They would actually revoke your citizenship if they found out about it.
Jesus.
So that was just how bad the racism was at that point in time. We on Native American.
We are.
I think. This was really the first time that I saw this.
Wasn't it uncomfortable?
Yeah. It's sort of referred to in...
It's just referred to. It's not sort of referred to. It's just referred to it.
As the California genocide. Native Americans suffered pretty greatly during the Spanish reign. Estimates, and again, I don't know where they got these from. It was just where I saw. Estimates was that there were as many as 300,000 Native Americans that lived in California prior to Spanish rule. By the end of the Mexican-American War, there was a total of around 150,000 Native Americans. Settlers, ironically enough, a non-slave-bearing state, a state that refused slavery themselves and said, no, we will not perform any slavery within our state's boundaries, would set up laws to where Native Americans could be arrested for loitering around anywhere where alcohol was present, and they would be put to jail, and from jail they would be allowed to be sold off to the highest bidder to go work in basically prison camps, whether it be mining, whether it be ranching, whether it be agriculture. And so for a state that wasn't into slavery, it seems like it just was dependent on...
Again, that's where the compromise came
through
and everything. It wasn't just that it was just like everyone there was like, no, we don't want it. It was just that was something that it was decided, when they were being granted statehood.
Well, also not to confuse it, it's a non-slave state. There were free black men there. Those free black men weren't granted voting rights or anything else. They weren't allowed to own property. So we still have a very stark divide in that area. But at the same time, these Native Americans just suffered.
And one thing too, like, and just, putting yourself in the position of someone who's living in a certain area, you see people that are kind of coming over and encroaching even further into your area, and you just keep moving west. As far as you can keep moving west, and if they're encroaching, you're just going to keep moving west. So you do that. And all of a sudden now you have essentially, Mexico coming up and everything. And so then you kind of get pushed up maybe a little bit to the north. And you're just getting worked into this pocket. And you're like, okay, I think we're kind of established here. We have this area, the ocean's right here. We haven't seen any, white people coming this far in mass or anything like that. And then all of a sudden, the area that you thought was far enough away and is kind of going to be your area, that gets hit really, really big all at once. And then you're just like, fuck, now do we have to like retreat inward again?
Yeah, and you're being pushed off your lands. And these are the lands that provide for everybody within your tribe, within your group, as far as you may be semi-nomadic. There may be different places that you're going to winter. There's going to be places you're going to spend spring. And it's just very dependent on a system that you've set up over generations to know that this is where you can find these certain things that you need to continue on. Mm-hmm. When you're pushed off that land, then you have to try to find these other resources. And eventually, if you don't have enough room and you don't have enough resources, you're going to start having to strike out at these
You're going to come into conflict when you don't have the basic things that you're used to having to, fucking survive.
And this is where the big downfall happens, is a raiding party would go out and maybe kill one or two miners, one or two ranchers, something like that. There would be just gangs of white settlers that would come back, and instead of just an eye for an eye, one or two scouts that they're taking out, they're massacring entire villages.
Yeah.
And
it
so
was just immediate escalation, retribution.
Retribution's coming in 30-1 every single time. And eventually, as we said, they totaled around 150,000 after the Mexican-American War. Between enslavement, killing them, and starving them out, the native population dropped to around 30,000 by 1870, and by 1900 it was down to 16,000 Native Americans. That's a span of 50-ish years, a little more than 50 years, to see a decline from 150,000 to 16,000.
Well, and one thing, that's always going to go and speed that up is dependent on how many people are still moving to that area, because that's additional land. You got to imagine that if someone's moving there, especially when agriculture becomes their biggest industry, that any of the land that you were used to being able to grow your shit on, or, graze your, cattle or whatever, that's now being taken over as agricultural land. So that's not available for you to do that kind of stuff anymore.
Yeah, you're being squeezed out by every single industry that's coming over there. Mm-hmm. And there's just nothing that you can do about it, because there's just so many of these people that are coming after you.
Well, then you get a method that's actually created in, I think the groundbreaking was actually in Sacramento in 1863. You get the first transcontinental. Jesus, did I say transcontinental?
Yeah.
We're not even 2 hours in, man. Transcontinental groundbreaking for basically the western edge of it, and it's going to start building itself east, and they're going to start building it from the east, and they're going to end up meeting in the middle. So what used to take weeks, or sorry, not even weeks, months to get over as far as all of that territory, people can actually cover like in days now. And not only that, it's not only the people that you're bringing in all that freight, equipment, and everything like that, that allows you to essentially need even more land, because this allows you to farm more land.
Yeah. It's also interesting that the Chinese Exclusion Act showed up a little after the Transcontinental Railroad was finished, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like maybe we needed a little bit more labor on this railroad before we just go ahead and exclude you guys from where you sacrificed yourselves. On a brighter note, on a much brighter note and kind of a fun note, as we said earlier, women in California were pretty rare. As the female population grew, this job industry for women would expand into just sort of to fill these voids that were kind of, I wouldn't say creature comforts, but things like restaurants, things like boarding houses, saloons, dance halls, brothels, of course, oldest profession in the world. You have a bunch of horny dudes there that if they're not Brokeback Mountaining themselves out in the fields.
Okay. That's something that I read in a couple different places, and it completely makes sense to me, is that this was also a place where, like you said, there was opportunity for everybody. People that usually got excluded by society and everything had a chance to kind of not have to reinvent, but kind of start life over, maybe in a place that was a little bit more freeing and accepting. And because this was such an established place so early on, they do kind of believe that that might be what kind of led to essentially that prominence of like the gay culture there. Because it was a place that was like civilized enough to where you could go and establish yourself in a city and everything, but still have, not big enough to where you had all of that, like, I guess, I don't know if religion, of course, made it out that way. What am I trying to say? Just a little bit more freedom, I guess.
It's just a more liberal area.
Yeah, exactly.
You're able to kind of explore and do your own thing. And that was born out of coming over, maybe failing, doing the mining thing, looking for gold, but then being able to reinvent yourself in a different way.
And here's the fact of the matter. Any culture that you look at, ancient cultures, the Romans, Greece, anything like that, sexuality essentially was just not, it wasn't a rule. It was more of a set of maybe guidelines, but it would be, you tiptoe across it every so often, and there wasn't really, no one really bat an eye about it, because that's just kind of how shit worked. Well, when you're essentially out here, and like Adam was saying, the initial influx of women was only 700 compared to, I think, like...
It's like 3% of the total.
It was even less than that. Yeah, that's going to lead to, as uncomfortable as that may make some people, when it's nothing but dudes around. There were instances where they would have like dances and everything in these towns, and people that wanted to adopt a more, traditionally like feminine role would essentially like wear handkerchiefs and everything at these dances. And there was fucking interaction between, dude on dude action.
Hilarious.
And that's what happened. Like you read anything about like the fucking, we talked about it with the fucking Spartans and shit, because you were in a situation when it was all males and you still had those fucking urges and everything like that. It just essentially kind of became, it was a norm.
Supply and demand.
Exactly.
Sexual supply and demand. So these industries that they would kind of work their way into, along with all of those other things, laundry and cleaning too, women started to make a pretty good life for themselves. And thankfully, for the California Constitution that was signed in 1850, it gave property rights to women.
Which was a huge draw
Yeah.
in bringing them out there. And also, what usually happened if women did have property and something happened to them?
As soon as they were married in, it would
Or
become...
as soon as they were married in.
Yeah. It would become the men's property.
Not
so
here.
What was written was all property, both real and personal, of the wife owned or claimed by her before marriage, and that acquired afterwards by gift, devise, don't know what the fuck that means, or descent, which, like an inheritance, would remain her separate property. So you were able to create this life for yourself, almost independent of your husband, to the point I think they said that this was like one of the hotbeds for divorce in the country, because if you had your own shit, you didn't have to put up with a shitty marriage.
Do you think that, like, during the drafting of their constitution that they were going to go with, one guy just stood up and was like, okay, I'm just going to call it out. It's all dudes here. This entire city feels like a sausage party. And I propose we introduce something in this bill. Might seem a little bit radical, but I think it'll be a big draw to finally get us some women out here. Let's let them have property.
Yeah.
And someone's like, until they're married, right? And he's like, here's the thing. That's not very popular back where I'm from. People tend to complain about that. So I think we're going to have to go ahead and get rid of that. But hey, you guys have already got all your property, right? So what's it going to hurt?
The dude that put that into the Constitution had to have been the horniest of the horny to get some ladies over there.
Imagine that pickup line. You walk in, some woman, you're like, this is a lovely place. Who owns it? And she's like, well, I do. And he's like, I know you do. Want to know you can do that? I made it happen.
You are welcome. Mm-hmm. This almost feels like when the gang signs over all of the merchandising rights to Dee to allow them to pay her less than minimum wage in Always Sunny. I'm sure that they were thinking about it, like, well, yeah, let's write it in. There's 700 women here. How much property are they going to amass? 700 of them compared to all
I think it was
us?
To draw.
Yeah,
it was to draw them over.
It definitely could have been. But it gave women a hell of a lot of power to be able to make their own money and kind of become their own people. And if you're sucking in all of this gold, you can start moving into different jobs. You can start lending money, which is huge because, again, you have all of these guys that were willing to up in their lives on the gamble to come out and to find gold. There's a good chance that those idiots are going to probably gamble or drink it away. And if you're in those industries, you're going to be able to...
It was currency.
Yeah, you were mining the miners.
You would go into some place, and if they accepted gold as a currency, essentially you would have where they could accept normal money, or they would have scales. And if you wanted something, there was probably a conversion with how much gold to money or dollar ratio, whatever.
Ounces.
And they would weigh it out, and then you would, receive whatever services you were looking for in that amount. Can you just imagine a lady of the night has a set of scales in the room? She's like, the gold, if you will. She's measuring out. She's like, and what would you like? She's just adding gold to it.
Did you listen?
When was the last time you took a bath? It's going to be extra.
Yeah.
More gold on there.
Yeah, this is Saving Silverman.
Yeah.
She's like, $200 for you, $500 for your friend.
All right.
I'm sure you listened to the podcast too, about the woman who was writing the book about her Chinese family and their exploits over in California. And her grandfather had started a factory for sewing crotchless panties. Sewing and selling crotchless panties. It was fancy underwear for fancy women.
What's fancier than no crotch?
Yeah. And there's nothing. It's the peak of fanciness. But
crazy how the times have changed, right?
There was, no shit. There was an actual market for this because they would sell them to ladies of the night that didn't have to worry about changing underwear in between callers, because if there's no crotch in them, these dudes probably aren't going to care. But it's just finding those
guys aren't going to care if there is a crotch in them.
No.
They'll just,
But to find those little niches in the market to be able to make money and to be profitable doing that,
to find those little niches to service people's niches.
we're able to find their way through.
That's the fucking American dream right there.
Yep. A crotchless panty factory. Everybody loved one of those. sort of the conclusion that we draw to with all this is the largest cities that were involved in the gold rush were very dangerous places. The influx of people showing up didn't allow for buildings to be constructed to be able to house these people.
Stuff was constructed in haste.
Yeah. So it was going to be mostly tents. There were going to be a hell of a lot of wooden buildings. And as California knows right now, sorry not to make light of it, there's a lot of fires that would happen in San Francisco. And it's just because you're in an area where, again, there's no electricity. You have people walking around with candles in their tents, in their little wooden ramshackle houses.
Every single camp has a fire.
Yes.
Out in the woods.
Well, even in the cities.
Yeah.
Like, it's an industry, or it's something that's needed kind
and
of
you're not
everywhere.
constructing this with the know-how of someone who's like, these buildings need to be this far apart, so if this one's caught on fire, it jumps across less quickly. Tons of tents, just everything can catch fire. And then not only that, because there's such an influx of people, if you don't have the kind of infrastructure to handle waste and everything, that's going to lead to like disease and sanitation issues. And that was definitely something that occurred as well, just because you can only build so quickly.
No.
And if you build too quickly, then it all ends up crumbling because you didn't spend enough time doing it.
Well, yeah, like we talked about, they jumped from 1,000 people in San Francisco to 25,000 people in a matter of a few years. Like, that's just, it's such an influx of people that you're going to have tent cities. You're going to have just wooden shacks that are put together.
Places that had been built out of the boats that had been left there from the people that jumped ship to go mine. And kind of part of it culminates in the Great Fire of San Francisco in 1851, ends up destroying 3/4 of the city.
Could you imagine just a fire starting at one point in the city, and by the time it's out, 3/4 of the city is gone?
Yeah.
And these natural disasters weren't just San Francisco problems. There was a great flood in Sacramento in 1850 that wiped out like most of the downtown in San Francisco because of Sacramento because of just these weather patterns that are hitting. So you're getting
it would have been crazy if maybe like, natural erosion could have prevented that from happening. Yeah. It's odd that there might have been a great flood that happened in Sacramento when it had been around for a while, so you would notice maybe if it had been an area that flooded often.
Yeah. Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of ideas of how geography worked.
I'm just thinking around the area with all of the shit being blasted and eroded for like the natural drainage areas, you're kind of redirecting stuff right down Main Street.
Well, yeah, you're redirecting rivers at a time when they're not all swollen because of the rainwater. So these new redirections, if you just have temporary holdings for them, they're going to end up busting and flooding out everything. So along with this great fire that destroyed 3/4 of the city, a lot of the goals towards rebuilding were with non-flammable materials, making stone buildings so they couldn't burn
building the
again,
shit out of bricks,
which I don't think actually helped too much, because I think there was another great fire in like 1900 that did some damage too. But these different measures would be instituted to cut down on fires. And San Francisco is becoming insanely wealthy at this point because they're getting all of this money that's coming back down from these gold miners that are either retiring or wanting to make something of themselves. There's economic opportunities to buy land in San Francisco for this vast expansion to try to take care of this growing population. And you have building and construction deals where these investors are literally just pulling gold out of the ground and going back to San Francisco and slapping it down and being like, I want to buy that, build me a building.
Any industry that you have over on the East Coast, you need to then mimic and at least have that and more over on the West Coast in San Francisco, because that's what all those people that are coming over need to be accustomed to. If you can just simply say, hey, move from the East Coast, you can come out here and have land. Like, you should see this place. The water's so much fucking nicer. Like, you can swim in this shit without freezing your ass off. And people are like, oh, okay. And you have everything we have. They're like, yeah, we have everything you guys have. Okay, well, what's the drawback of that?
Absolutely nothing. The city would end up kind of turning on what built it, and they would start to try to clean up the riffraff and the squatters and try to kind of make it a legitimate city, which again, San Francisco is sort of known now for having a lot of homeless people. So that's a different kind of migration that happens. But also it does kind of make sense because again, it's a climate that lends itself to being more mild. Better government and policing began to clean up the city even more. It would start to transform into a city of industry as far as these vast expansions out to where it would meet the demands of this growing population. Like I said, you would start to see more industry being built within the city. You would get these districts as far as like Haight and Ashbury, the Castro district, Mission Hill, and I believe Mission Hill was an area where there was an old monastery that had kind of been enveloped by the city. Also, you have the San Francisco Mint established in 1854. So literally within 6 years after the gold rush had started, there was so much money that the federal government was like, ooh, we need to figure out a way to store all of that gold.
We've learned that whether it be transporting it by land, that can definitely get hijacked.
Oh, yeah.
And we can only, send so many people with that. We've noticed, based on the Spanish, that ships get sunk.
Yep.
So loading a ton of gold on the ships really doesn't work for our investment. So we're going to need to create a place where we can process all that gold that's already being spent there as a currency. Those people being paid in gold probably want to go exchange that for something that's a little bit easier to spend. You go in, you exchange that, and you've got to have a place to process that into coinage or however bars, whatever you want to do. But you don't want to have it, have to travel. So you're going to create some place to store it there.
And then if we need to go get it, we can send companies like Wells Fargo that were just a transport company before they became Wells Fargo the bank, and this is what transforms the Wells Fargo company into the Wells Fargo or into the banking industry.
Yep.
The San Francisco Mint was built in 1854. By 1874, it had exceeded its capacity to hold gold and silver and other precious metals.
Oh, shit.
They had,
So, Levi Strauss,
Yep.
German immigrant, started selling denim overalls in San Francisco in 1853.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to sell a material that is a little bit more durable than like cotton, not as fucking heavy as wool and everything, but is durable and can hold up. Yeah, that's the fucking place to do it is during this gold rush and when all of this farming industry and everything is getting its build up.
Overalls came before jeans, right? Had to have.
Yeah, I would imagine. Well, you also had maybe in denim, but you also just had trousers.
Yeah.
And those weren't overalls. But no, I think probably overalls before jeans, but trousers before overalls.
Just because it was sort of like a working man could wear overalls, and then as it turned into more of like a...
You don't see a fucking investment banker wearing overalls.
It's
a working man's outfit, or if you're a kid and or not kid and play crisscross,
yeah,
you're wearing backwards. We
also
all did that.
Possibility. This old San Francisco Mint, within the vaults, you can actually see the impressions of gold coins that were pressed down so much by the weight of other gold on top of it that it actually started to leave impressions in the concrete within inside these vaults. That's how much gold was there. In order to get all that back, as Chris mentioned earlier, Transcontinental Railroad begins in 1863. It's finished in 1869. Wild that we started that during the tail end of the Civil War.
Fuck, I just keep finding stuff. Mark Twain got his start in San Francisco. He initially joined his brother prospecting for gold, then ends up finding success as a reporter for the San Francisco Call.
Crazy. Yeah, so this is just all industries are booming out of California at this point in time, and it's had an effect on the world because this wasn't just gold that was going to the United States. All of these immigrants that came over and mined for gold, and don't get me wrong, a very large amount of prospectors that set out to find gold ended up tanking out and not making any money. There was a very small percentage that eked out enough to be able to go back and either live comfortably or kind of get themselves ahead of where they were before they left. And then there's this very minute amount of people that were able to make a ton of money.
Which were people that probably already had money to begin with. They were able to come in with larger operations.
Yeah, they were the ones that started to invest in hydraulic mining because it was cost prohibitive for just a single miner that wasn't a part of an organization to be able to buy all this equipment. So it's a situation where the rich did get richer. There are definitely rags to riches stories coming out of the gold fields where people that were poor would go out and find gold. There's also rags to riches stories with the industry that went on and the merchants that were able to sell to all these people that just kind of grew out of it.
If anyone listening has is either from that area, like the San Francisco area, or actually had
that is, I think,
or had relatives that actually you can track back to migrating over from the gold rush, because again, this is only in 1863, so that could technically even be just a great grandpa, I think, maybe. Or a great grandpa could be the kid that was born to the guy that migrated over for the gold rush. We'd actually want to hear about that. That would be cool to know that there's some of that lineage that's traceable like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a worldwide event that had ramifications beyond the United States borders, but at the same time sort of shaped our country in a different way just because of the influx of money. And not to mention, I'm sure that a good amount of California Gold Rush gold probably helped the Union Army during the Civil War and potentially the Confederate Army.
Well, not only that, but it was also that mint was to be protected, so much so that they believed that there was probably a chance that the Confederacy could try to actually sail boats around the tip of South America, come up, attack San Francisco, and steal the gold reserves there to essentially bolster their finances to afford more weapons, things like that. And so a lot of the gold from the mint was actually relocated out to Alcatraz, which if you've listened to our Alcatraz episode, it was essentially designed as like a fort and a prison, essentially for Confederate soldiers. And the gold was actually stored out there and protected as well.
Yeah, that would be a sketchy ship ride out there with that much gold.
Jesus. Yeah, you're telling me. And the crazy thing, too, as far as what's recognized as the gold rush itself, that mass migration of people, you don't consider essentially the mining that was occurring in mass for, decades after that. But the gold rush was only a period of 7 years, ending in 1855. And that's when they consider that mass migration happening. Because it was the largest mass migration in U.S. history. It ends up being somewhere in the neighborhood of 300,000 people ended up migrating over there due to this.
Which is, 0.1% of the population today, and I think it was 1% of the population at the time in the United States.
Yeah.
Ended up moving out there for this.
Yeah.
Just an incredible amount of people.
Yeah, something that you don't realize. I mean, everyone's kind of aware of the gold rush, but I don't think it's known at all how that actually shaped this entire area of the United States.
No, and just the world. More gold, more precious metals in the world means that there's more trading and more things going on.
Yeah.
It's a stimulus to the world economy.
Fuck, I wonder if you can, because you can test metals, they can tell where certain stuff comes from. I wonder if there's a test they can do, if there's any type of elemental makeup, periodic, chemical makeup that differentiates gold found in this section of the world to gold found in this other section of the world. And if you had gold, you could have it tested to find where it was actually, dug up from.
I don't know.
If anyone knows that, let us know. Yeah. All right, man. You got anything else on this?
No, I think we found some pretty good nuggets in this episode.
Don't do that. We almost made it without one last pun. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us on another week, and we'll catch you next time.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is Historically High Pod, Historically High POD, and we are on Twitter at Historically High. That's Historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.